Hello, everyone, and welcome to the technical deep dive and public event on low carbon and climate smart cities. My name is Victor Mulas from the World Bank Tokyo Development Learning Center, and I will be your MC for today's program. Today is the second day of the week-long technical deep dive, and the first half of today's program is open to the public via this Zoom webinar. Welcome to those of you that are joining us for the first time through the public event. One of TDLC's mission is to share global and Japanese knowledge and expertise on the challenges facing our cities, and we hope that today's public sessions achieve that. Please join us in Twitter, sharing your thoughts with us. We will be tweeting during the sessions to further disseminate the knowledge that we will have today. You will have the hashtag of the TDD on the chat. The chat master will put it there right now. So please help us disseminate more what we learned today. For today's event, we have a great line of speakers and presentations, and we will be taking a forward-looking view to explore key priorities as we strive to develop low-carbon climate smart cities. Please note that the first two sessions will be conducted in English, while the third session will be conducted in Japanese. There is simultaneous translation available for this event, so please select your language of choice by clicking the interpretation icon in the Zoom menu. We will have time for questions after the presentations for speakers, so please feel free to post questions to the speakers through the chat. You can do it through the sessions as they are going on. And now let's get started with today's program. The theme for today is the role of cities in achieving ambitious mitigation targets. And we will explore what actions the local governments are taking to meet their mitigation targets and goals. We will first learn from the global climate regime, national commitments, and the implications for the transition to net zero emissions. We will then dig into a country-wide example, going to Japan and learning about the key policies and strategies for achieving zero carbon cities. Finally, we will examine how cities are targeting the challenge through the case of Kyoto, where we will learn about the city's climate action since COP3. We will start now with our first thematic presentation, Paris Agreement, Glasgow Outcomes, Implications for Local Governments. Let me invite Joanna Masic, Lead Urban Specialist at the World Bank, to moderate this session. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor, and welcome everybody to this session. We're going to cover the Paris Agreement, the Glasgow Outcomes, and the implications for local governments. I'm Joanna Masic. I'm Global Lead for Sustainable City Infrastructure and Services at the World Bank. And we're delighted to have with us today Mr. Jacob Werksman. He's Principal Advisor on Climate at the European Commission. And he's going to share with us today his experience. He's had, if I can say, a long history in the international climate regime back to the Kyoto Protocol, which we will also hear from Kyoto today. So very relevant to have him here with us. And Mr. Werksman, we have from our side country and city delegations here today from across the world, from China, Ecuador, Egypt, Kenya, Nepal, South Africa, Uzbekistan, as well as partners from Japan. And so we're very excited to have you here, and over to you to share your thoughts with us. If we can wrap up the presentation by about 1:30, we can still have some minutes for Q&A. So over to you, Mr. Werksman.
Thanks very much, Joanna, and thanks very much for the organizers to invite me to present a few slides and a few words on the outcomes from Glasgow and the implications they might have for cities around the world. Very exciting to be together with you today and to hear in particular from those of you who have the immediate challenge of implementing aspects of the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Outcomes, where I simply play a role in trying to produce the outcomes of these international conferences. But maybe I can start by sharing my screen and some slides to help everyone follow along with the presentation. Can you see the slides well?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, it seems like quite a long time ago now that Glasgow wrapped up COP26, and in some ways the world has changed even since then. But it was really only 3 months ago, and planning is already underway for COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November of this year. But as you can see from this picture, as the COP opened, hundreds of thousands of citizens appeared on the streets of the city of Glasgow, demanding from the international community more action and more ambition on climate change. And cities essentially provide that kind of platform, that kind of passion that can drive demands for climate action. And as I'm sure we'll be hearing in the course of the day, cities also increasingly provide some of the solutions as well. But I'm pleased today to provide some brief reflections on the COP itself and what it might mean for cities. As I mentioned before, I spend most of my time as a treaty negotiation person working on generating outcomes from conferences like COP26 and working at the regional level at the European Commission. So the perspective that I will bring to this conversation is really quite top-down in its character, but I'm very interested in hearing the questions and comments from colleagues that spend their day-to-day work lives delivering on the ground the kind of solutions that we all know will be necessary for addressing climate change as a challenge. But first, perhaps a reminder of the basic architecture of the Paris Agreement. COP26 was obviously the conference of the parties to the Paris Agreement, but also the governing body of the Framework Convention and of the Kyoto Protocol that Joanna mentioned. The Paris Agreement itself reflects a third generation of international treaties that have been negotiated to try to address the challenge of climate change. And the design that we settled on essentially contains a series of what we call top-down and bottom-up components. Probably most significantly, the Paris Agreement sets various very ambitious goals for the international community. As many you will have heard, the parties to the Paris Agreement, which includes over 190 countries and the European Union, commit to ensuring that we avoid together global average temperature rises of above 2 degrees Celsius and to try to pursue a global average temperature limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is a key ambitious mitigation goal under the Paris Agreement. In order to achieve that, avoiding dangerous climate change, we also commit to achieving net zero global emissions as soon as possible, and preferably in the second half of this century. The Paris Agreement isn't just about cutting emissions, it also sets an ambitious goal for ensuring that we enhance the resilience, particularly of vulnerable communities around the world, to the impacts of climate change, recognizing that there is already built into the atmosphere enough greenhouse gases to already see the impacts of climate change. And so we have to do more to enhance the adaptive capacity and the resilience of communities around the world. And then finally, the Paris Agreement also provides this very important financial goal as well, to ensure that all financial flows, whether they are flows from donor governments to recipient governments, whether they're public sector flows or private sector flows, whether they are the resources that governments provide to their own economies, we have to ensure that all of those flows are consistent with the goals of avoiding dangerous climate change and enhancing resilience. This is obviously a role in which the World Bank plays a very significant part, both through public as well as leveraging private finance. So that's essentially the top-down character of Paris, is in setting these collective goals of a very ambitious character. The more bottom-up characteristic of Paris is that in order to achieve those goals, we ask each party, over 190 parties to the Paris Agreement, to come forward with their nationally determined contributions, how it is that each of them will take steps by setting targets and putting in place policies that will get those emissions under control and to align their economies, their energy systems with pathways towards those ambitious goals, particularly the net zero goal by the middle of the century. These nationally determined contributions can be supplemented with long-term strategies that describe the pathways between where we are now in terms of emissions trajectories and where we need to be by the middle of this century. It was recognized when the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015 that the nationally determined contributions that countries had come forward with were in fact insufficient to reach that 1.5 degree goal, to reach that net zero goal. And so Paris has built into it what we call a dynamic 5-year ambition cycle, which requires all the parties to come together on a regular basis every 5 years, to take stock of what the science is telling us in terms of the challenge that we face, and to take stock of the progress that we've made so far in addressing that science, both in terms of cutting emissions, but also in terms of enhancing resilience. This is what we call the global stocktake that will begin already this year, conclude in 2023, and by 2025 produce the next generation of emissions reduction commitments that parties will take and that will govern the period from 2030 onwards. It was also recognized in Paris that goals and targets and an ambitious cycle are not enough. We also have to put in place a robust transparency and accountability system. This is more of the top-down character of Paris, but enables us to track progress towards achieving the targets that parties set for themselves. So this means that every 2 years, all parties to the Paris Agreement have to submit reports that describe through their national inventories of greenhouse gases, but also that describe the policies that they're putting in place to achieve their targets to enable us to track progress towards those targets. So those biennial reports will then be subject to a technical expert review, where each party's data and information is subject to a review by technical experts, a peer review where parties will assess each other's progress towards those targets individually, and then the potential for an implementation and compliance committee to oversee an individual party's performance in circumstances where, for example, they've failed to submit an NDC, they've failed to provide the reports necessary to track progress towards those NDCs. In those circumstances, this standing committee can take up individual cases of parties that are having difficulties implementing or have failed to demonstrate that they've complied with particular provisions of the Paris Agreement. These transparency and accountability rules are applicable to all parties, both developed and developing parties under the Paris Agreement, which is a significant change from previous regimes, which divided the world between developed and developing countries, requiring much more of the developed countries and much less of developing countries. They are now all part of the same common and robust transparency and accountability system. And then finally, an aspect of Paris, Kyoto, and the Framework Convention is their very comprehensive coverage. We've talked about the need to cut emissions. We've talked about the need to build resilience, but the Paris Agreement and the Framework Convention now cover much more than just mitigation and just adaptation. They also cover international carbon markets. They deal with issues around response measures. So how it is that one party's policy might have an effect, for example, through trade and investment flows on another party's efforts to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. They cover finance, as I've described before, but they also cover technology transfer, capacity building, and they look at different other sectoral aspects of Paris compliance, including ensuring that we are all sharing scientific studies and raising awareness of the public about what the science is telling us, how we address not just emissions and the resilience necessary to deal with the industrial sectors, but also to address land use change and forestry, including the agricultural sector. And then I've described before, the Paris Agreement and the Framework Convention also ensure that we facilitate and promote implementation and compliance. So the treaties themselves have this now very comprehensive coverage. And when the treaty bodies meet in a conference such as that held in Paris, they bring together not just parties, but also non-party stakeholders. That includes non-governmental organizations, includes the private sector, it includes international organizations like the World Bank and the UN system, but also increasingly importantly includes local authorities as well as the governments of cities and other local jurisdictions. So the topics that we cover are comprehensive, and the stakeholders that we invite to participate in these international conferences are comprehensive in terms of the levels of government that they represent, and the stakeholders that they represent both in the public and in the private domain. So this was essentially the stage that was set for Paris, the COP27, the meeting of the Paris Agreement parties, and the conference itself, I think, did a great deal to raise public awareness and to focus public attention and the attention of policymakers on the challenge of climate change. It was not, it has to be said, an overall success in terms of demonstrating to the public, to those people demonstrating on the streets in Glasgow, that we have the challenge of climate change under control. And I'm sure you've seen similar diagrams that show and compare, as this one does, where it is we are in terms of the policies that we put in place to address climate change, and where it is that we need to be in order to achieve the Paris Agreement's ambitious goals of avoiding a 1.5 degree temperature rise. And what you can see at the bottom of this thermometer on the right-hand side of the screen is where we are in terms of current global average temperature rise. Since the pre-industrial period, global average temperatures have risen between 1.1 and 1.2 degrees Celsius as a result of growing greenhouse gas emissions. Where we've committed to be, as I said before, is avoiding 1.5 degrees global average temperature rise. But as you can see here from the policies and actions that countries have committed to through NDCs and through their long-term strategies, those pledges and targets that they've made on top of those NDCs, and taking into account the most optimistic scenarios that assumes that all of those targets, all of those policies and actions, and all of those pledges are fully implemented, we are still on track to rising global average temperatures in the range of 1.8 to 2.4 degrees Celsius. So in terms of what we've committed to do, and in terms of what we've begun to implement, we are still well off track in terms of where we need to be through efforts at the global level, such as the negotiations that took place in Glasgow, and of course efforts at every level of society. So still a lot more to be done. What I've done in this next slide is to basically summarize the progress that we made in Glasgow across different areas of policy: mitigation, that is cutting emissions; adaptation and loss and damage, that is preparing for the impacts; finance, that is making sure that financial flows are reaching those people that need it to make the investments to cut emissions and to improve resilience; and then this very important but quite technical area that the climate change negotiators continue to work on, which is this rule book around transparency, accountability, the functioning of carbon markets, which is very important in order to make sure that parties don't just make commitments but follow through on them. I'm going to very, very briefly, for the purposes of today's presentation, just draw out a few highlights of what it is that Glasgow achieved and what it means for next steps by governments around the world. I think the most important thing to draw out of progress made and challenges ahead with regard to mitigation is that Glasgow really sets a few more quite specific and concrete benchmarks in terms of what we expect governments to do next. With regard to cutting their emissions, of course, we expect countries to come forward with nationally determined contributions that are much more ambitious and much more aligned with the Paris Agreement goals than they have been in the past. So we have set up a process now that annually will check to see whether parties' NDCs are not just cutting emissions, but they are cutting emissions with the urgency and speed necessary to put us on track to 1.5 degrees and to achieve net zero as soon as possible. Those messages were reinforced in Glasgow. We also have new sector-specific and policy-specific benchmarks that were set in Glasgow. through the international community, calling on all countries to participate in the phase down of coal, unabated coal as a source of energy, focusing on specific other gases, such as methane as a critical priority in terms of cutting greenhouse gas emissions, focusing on the development of new policies, such as the phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies, and the focusing on the need to address nature-based solutions that not only cut emissions, but also help preserve and conserve rich biological diversity. So there are new benchmarks that emerge from Glasgow that help us to understand not only just how much more quickly we need to move, but in what areas we need to move, what kinds of technologies, what kinds of fuel sources, what kinds of policies that need to be put in place. So that's, I think, a very important aspect of Glasgow, and we'll see at the upcoming COP in Sharm el-Sheikh that ministers will be asked to gather, not just this year, but every year between now and 2030, to keep the pressure on those pre-2030 targets to ensure that they are aligning more with the Paris Agreement goals and with these new policy and technology and fuel-based benchmarks that we've set for ourselves in Glasgow. Glasgow also stands for the concept that we need to be focusing more and more on adaptation, how to build resilience, but also in terms of loss and damage, how we deal with circumstances where communities and countries are feeling the impacts of climate change that take them beyond their ability to adapt. So this might be responses to extreme weather events where communities essentially have to rebuild in circumstances where they haven't proved to be resilient enough. They can also be circumstances where slow onset events, such as sea level rise, make it essential that communities find ways of adapting beyond what the status quo is to deal, for example, with the loss of coastal zones or the loss of freshwater sources of drinking water. We will see in the course of the coming 2 years, therefore, a much greater focus on the global goal on adaptation that I mentioned before, and a much more focus on loss and damage, these impacts that go beyond adaptation, finding policy solutions, but also significantly finding more financial resources to help vulnerable communities deal with the challenges of these extreme weather events and slow onset events that can change the way in which communities and economies evolve over time. And then finally, on finance, Glasgow has begun now to focus on post-2025. Many of you will know that in 2020, we set and renewed a goal for the international community to raise as much as $100 billion annually to provide financing from richer countries to poorer countries. That $100 billion goal, unfortunately, was not met in Glasgow, and a roadmap has been designed to ensure that developed countries are held accountable for meeting that goal in the future. But we also started talking about setting a goal beyond 2025, when that $100 billion annual goal will expire, and we have to come up with a new goal for the post-2025 period. Conversations around that goal, my sense are going to be much broader in their nature in terms of where we expect those financial flows to come from. It can't just be about what it is that rich countries provide poor countries on the basis of national budgets, but increasingly is going to have to look at broadening that donor base, but also look at ways in which we can cooperate internationally on ensuring that private sector flows as well begin to align with the Paris Agreement goals. So lots of was achieved in Glasgow in terms of demonstrating progress, but much more needs to be done in the future in order to ensure that we're acting with the urgency and speed necessary to actually achieve the Paris Agreement goals overall. Turning briefly now to the topic of today's conversation, which is about the role of cities. Where cities really shine at meetings like COP26 is obviously not in the negotiating rooms, where citizens are represented by their national governments, not by their local authorities, but outside the negotiating rooms in the increasingly popular and well-attended what we call green zone of the Conference of the Parties, where non-party stakeholders get together, share their experiences, and sign up to commitments that in many circumstances demonstrate how they are moving faster than national governments in order to contribute to the implementation of Paris. This is a slide that very briefly describes, but provides you a web link to more detail on an initiative that the European Union has been very proud to support, the Global Covenant of Mayors, which worked hard to prepare for Glasgow and came up with a series of initiatives and reports that describe progress being made at the municipal level to contribute to Paris, but also setting out plans for the future as to how the Global Covenant of Mayors for climate and energy action can do more to support Paris implementation over time. And what you'll see in this report is that the number of local authorities that are participating in the Global Covenant, I'm sure many of them are participating in today's and yesterday's session, is growing. The number is growing, the number of people that they represent is growing, and the number of actions that they're taking at the local level is growing as well. So I recommend, if you haven't seen it, looking into that report to see how governments are making the connection between what they do at the local level and what's being negotiated at the international level. Finally, just to distill those messages a little bit more and to provide you a link to another report that I found to be very persuasive about how cities can follow up after COP26. Here are 5 headline messages that former colleagues of mine at the World Resources Institute in Washington have pulled together as recommendations for cities following on to Glasgow as to what they can do. Obviously, bridging the gap between what cities are doing and those nationally determined contributions that I mentioned before. Following the guidance from scientists that it's essential to integrate climate action into every aspect of city planning and priority setting. That's obviously both with regard to cutting emissions, as well as in terms of enhancing resilience to the impacts of climate change. Sustainable mobility is a sector in which cities, as managers of many of the public transportation systems around the world, play a critical role in. So taking a more comprehensive approach to sustainable mobility is a key aspect of follow-up at the city level. Nature-based solutions to manage water and to build resilience. Increasingly, cities are investing in their green areas, parklands, but also watersheds and the surrounding green belts as a way of contributing to aspects of both cutting emissions and enhancing resilience. And then finally, a lesson that we have learned in the European Union, certainly, but also in our relationships with our developing country partners around the world, that equity is essential to ensuring effective climate policy, making sure that no country, no community is left behind as we pursue this profound transformation towards a net zero economy and net zero society, to make sure that those parts of our communities that might be affected by the transition away from dependence on fossil fuel are helped as part of that transition. And as we invest more and more in the benefits of climate action, such as improving air quality, improving public transportation, improving the efficiency of buildings at the household level, that poor communities and otherwise excluded communities participate in the benefits of those investments as well. So putting equity and inclusion at the center of climate policy is another and last recommendation that these colleagues at WRI have come forward with. So let me stop there. Thanks very much for the chance to kind of set out from the very top down to the bottom up what the implications of Glasgow were. And I look forward to participating in any discussion that we might have time for. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jacob. A very clear take on the Paris Agreement and Glasgow outcomes. So thank you very much for that. We have time for a few questions. So if you don't mind, I will ask you a couple of questions. You mentioned in a few areas where you see the sort of next phase of the international climate regime going and how local authorities will need to prepare for that more. I wondered specifically on the topic of climate finance. You mentioned the role of the private sector in particular. If you had any thoughts, with the the Article 6 now enacted and the carbon markets opening, do you see any directions there that cities should be thinking about as they plan? We have here delegations who are preparing lending projects with the World Bank, and it might be useful to hear a little bit on that. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, so this was a very important development at Glasgow. I didn't get into the technical details of it, but we've been working very hard since 2015 to complete what's often referred to as the rule book of the Paris Agreement, and in particular, the rules on the way in which carbon markets, international carbon markets, will be accounting for any transfers of carbon market instruments, whether they're allowances or offsets between parties, but also very importantly to resolve the rules that will enable the functioning of an international offsetting mechanism under the Paris Agreement. So the accounting rules and the operationalization of this offsetting mechanism were essentially resolved in Glasgow. And so now the way in which the Paris Agreement will deal with international carbon markets is a lot clearer than it's been in the past. These rules were seen as necessary because there are many that believe that international carbon markets can provide a way for countries and companies within those countries to implement their emissions reduction commitments in the most cost-effective way possible. So there is still a lot of conceptual interest in carbon markets providing part of the solution. When we get to the role of offsets and this international offsetting mechanism, carbon markets can also potentially provide an opening of investment flows, so that those that are seeking low-cost, cost-effective ways of reducing emissions can make investments in other countries to reduce those emissions. If those investments produce emissions reductions that are certified by that UN mechanism, then companies and countries can use those offsets as a way of demonstrating their compliance with their emissions reduction commitments. So rules essential, and then the basic design rules for this offsetting mechanism essential, both for making sure that carbon markets are robust, they're following the rules, they have lots of environmental integrity, but also that they can encourage investment in emissions reducing projects as well. What we haven't yet seen is a real clear signal that there will be a significant demand for these units and a reliable supply for these units. On the demand side, the European Union and most other countries that have signed up to targets under the Paris Agreement seem to be planning to implement those commitments largely through domestic action. So when the EU has set its target to reduce its emissions by at least 55% by 2030, we expect to do that primarily through investments and reductions at home within the EU territory. We're not looking to use offsets from other jurisdictions as a way of achieving that. And that's true across the bulk of the major emitters that are part of the Paris Agreement. I think it's fair to say that maybe New Zealand and Switzerland, Norway, there are a few countries for which the cost of implementing domestically exclusively is too high for them to contemplate not needing to rely on international offsets. But other than that, there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of demand. On the other hand, there seems to be a lot of interest in supplying the markets. So many of the developing countries that have signed up to the Paris Agreement have indicated in their NDCs that in order to finance emissions reductions within their countries, they would like to be able to sell offsets or units to other countries to buy them. And so, for a city that's thinking, is there a way in which I can use Article 6 under the Paris Agreement to attract investment for my mitigation activities? I think they need to look carefully at the fact that there is this mismatch between supply and demand. If they make the effort to understand and try to comply with these new rules that have been developed under Paris, in anticipation that they're going to be able to sell units to someone who needs them and is prepared to use them, they need to be a bit cautious about that, because I don't think that market has significantly emerged yet. The one possible exception to that is the number of large multinational companies around the world that are beginning to make net zero commitments. So more and more companies are saying, well, in order to reassure our consumers and our shareholders that we are compliant with Paris, that we care about Paris, that we care about climate change, we're going to go to net zero as company corporate operations. And it seems that many of these companies rely upon fossil fuels for transportation, for the running of their businesses. Some of them sell fossil fuels. That they're going to have to look for offsets as a way of achieving those net zero goals. And so there might be what we call a voluntary compliance market out there for example, companies that are making these voluntary pledges that might go in search of offsets. And it might be that cities could supply that market. That's not a market that's governed by Paris. That's governed by voluntary standards and not by the Paris Agreement rules, but it still might be a source of investment for some cities.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I think we're just running out of time, but I wanted to emphasize one point at the end that you also made about the equity and inclusion. And I think the EC has given a big priority also to the just transition, and that was something that came out as well strongly in the Glasgow discussions. So just for our participants to take note of that as well. But thank you very much for being here today, and it was fascinating. And we're going to move on now to hear about Japan and the case of some cities. So thank you very much, Mr. Werksman.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Victor. Have a great meeting.
Thank you both. Thank you for this presentation and moderation. It was a very interesting presentation, and I hope everybody in the audience enjoyed as much as I did. So now we move on to the next presentation. We are going to go from the global agreements and the global environment, and we're going to deep dive in a country-specific example, taking us to Japan. This presentation will be moderated by our colleague Barjor Mehta. He is a lead urban specialist at the World Bank, and he will be moderating the next session on Japan's approach for a decarbonized society. Barjor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. And thank you to the previous speaker and Joanna for a wonderful presentation and the question and the response to it. In this session, we will look at Japan's approach to a decarbonized society. And the speaker is Mr. Kentaro Takahashi. He's a Deputy Director for Climate and Energy area at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. That is a very famous institute in Japan, IGES. And he's responsible for many of the countries that are participating today. For example, he is responsible for China, Indonesia, Thailand, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Mongolia, Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, and Myanmar. So you see, he has a lot of experience. And his presentation will dwell on 4 areas, which are very important. And that is the development of climate change policies in Japan, the overall picture. And then he will talk about the GHG emissions and reduction rates in Japan, what has been happening. And then very much, it's something that is of very great interest to all our participants today, is the role of local governments in reducing greenhouse gases. And he will end up with giving us the future perspectives of what the future holds for low carbon city development in Japan. So with that, let me hand it over to Mr. Takahashi for his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barjor, for your kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing to invite this very important event. And now let me share my presentations. Okay, I hope you can see my slides. So thank you very much. And from my presentation, I would like to share the Japan approaches, and I also talk about the future perspective of the low carbon cities in the futures. So this slide shows background on the climate change policy in Japan I think the previous speaker already touched upon the background of the climate change after the Kyoto Protocol. So in 1997, Kyoto Protocol was adopted in Kyoto when the COP3 was hosted by Japanese government. At that time, first legislations in Japan's Act on Promotion of Global Warming Countermeasures was also enacted, and this act is basically established a framework to address global warming countermeasure at global and also local government level, and also entity and citizen level. So based on this act, policy and measure for reducing the greenhouse gas emissions are very much promoted in Japan. In 2002, Japan ratified Kyoto Protocol, and also after 3 years, Kyoto Protocol entered into the force. And in this time, the Japanese government set the Kyoto Protocol target achievement plan. So in the first commitment period was just started from 2008. And in accordance with this target plan, government Japan prepared the future policy and measures how to achieve the greenhouse gas emission in the first commitment period. So one of the good example at government level in Japan is what was it in 2006, mandatory accounting and reporting system was just introduced, especially for entity level. So entity who have emissions more than 3,000 tons CO2 per year, they were required to report to the Japanese government every year, just reporting for government. And one of the objectives under this system is to identify how much emissions are emitted at the entity level, and the government Japan encourage more action for the private sector through this system. And during the first commitment period, Japan had a set target minus 6%. And under this commitment period, Japan tried to make an effort for reductions domestically. But under the Kyoto Protocol, there are flexible mechanisms, use of the Kyoto mechanisms. I think that some of you may already knew the CDM is the one of the mechanisms under the United Nations. And for example, in case of Japan, private sector from Japanese side, they invested the renewable and also energy efficiency project in developing countries like China, India, also Indonesia. And once they generate emission reaction from those projects, carbon credit will be traded, has been traded to offset their emissions. So Japan acquires, I think, around 100 million ton from the CDM, GIS, and GI to achieve the Kyoto at that time. And after 2015 adoptions of the Paris Agreement we had, and also after 2016, so many private sector and also non-state actor play a very important role towards decarbonizations. Already previous speaker mentions, because I think the non-state actors, so including the local government and also private sector, they're I think very much I think they have a direct connection to the activities in the, especially for business and also economic activities. So if they don't have any law in the this area, I think that we cannot achieve the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 as well as 2050. So, and in 2020, as you may already knew, former Prime Minister Asuga, he announced 2015 carbon neutrality target, and 2021, as you know, President Biden from the United States, actually the United States re-entered the Paris Agreement February 2021, and Japan had decided to increase the NDC from the 2060% to 46% at 2030 level. So this is a very drastic change after 2020, and I didn't expect for 2020, frankly speaking. And so in Japan, now many private sector and local governments are very much proactive for reducing greenhouse gas emission, and they are trying to make a strategy how to achieve by 2030 as well 2050. So when we're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions in Japan, so according to the information by Japanese government, in 2020 we had a 1.15 billion ton, and if we target achieved by 2030, our emissions should be reduced 0.76 billion. So, so to achieve, we have to reduce 0.45 billion ton reduction. And now we have a global measure plan in accordance with the cabinet decision. And so now we are here. And after 2013, we drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by promotions, especially renewable energy. I think that in the future, we have to promote more renewable energy as well as energy efficiency to achieve. So as the previous speaker already mentioned, I think that to align with the Paris target 1.5 degree, we have to evaluate our greenhouse gas emissions annually. And if our target is not enough for achieving the 1.5 degree, we have to promote and we have to raise our ambitions more. So this slide shows the structure of each policy and plan in Japan. And as I mentioned, Japan participates in the Kyoto Protocol and also Paris Agreement, and NDC and long-term strategy. So this was basically required by the Paris Agreement. So that's why Japan submitted the NDC. And also when we increase our ambitions, we resubmitted NDC to the UNFCCC Secretariat. So Japan only we participate the first commitment period because at the time in 2013, only the 27% of the greenhouse gas emission worldwide only cover those 27% only cover by the Kyoto Protocol. So Japan's would like to encourage more participation from the more GHG emitting countries. So that's why the Japan participate only first commitment period. So taking this example, so in Japan, in case of the Japanese Act on Promotion of the Global Warming, this act was revised in 2013 because Japan didn't participate in the second commitment period. So global warming countermeasure plan. So this is a currently basically our greenhouse gas emission reduction target plan to achieve the Paris goal. And in 2013, already mentioned the local government has a very important role to implement a measure and policy to achieve. So when we're looking at the global warming countermeasure plan, especially for reduction target, so this reduction target has a different target by each sector. And when we are talking about the role of the local government, I think the commercial and residential sector is a very important because I think the local government may have some policy and measure to interpret more good way for so that they can have more understanding at the citizen level. So in accordance with this reduction target, so previously just government sets a 40%, and now commercial sector government this level up to 51%, and so also residential level this number was also very much increased and up to 66%. So I think the local government have a very much important role how we promote more energy consumer side to achieve the global warming countermeasure plan. So now I just want to move the current situation in Japan, especially for local government. So now we can see a huge number of the local government who declare net zero CO2 emission by 2050. So Tokyo Metropolitan Government and also today's speaker, Kyoto City and Yokohama City, those very major city who already announced those targets. And now the number of the local government has reached 598 government level, local government level. And this number cover about 115 million residents. So we have a 125 million people as a whole. So I think more than 90% population already covered by those governments. And the number of the has been significantly increased after the announcement by Prime Minister Suga at the time of the 2020. So you can see that this figure, and why this number also increased is that under the Council for National and Local Decarbonizations, Regional Decarbonization Plan has been a roadmap already here. And based on this roadmap, now local government try to accelerate their more actions. So what is the role of the local government in the future is so according to the global countermeasure plans, there is some description how they can contribute. And so basically local governments can promote more comprehensive and systematic measure to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And one of the example is they can just use promote the use of the renewable energy for consumer, like residents and also commercial sector who are located in their local area, and also promotion of the energy conservation. And also I think they can provide more information to the business and residents for public awareness, like through the workshop and also study tour. So those kind of the law maybe in the future local government can do and implement for further emission reductions to achieve net zero. So global countermeasure plan identifies the 6 important elements in Japan, and one of the elements is related to the local decarbonization model region. So now Ministry of the Environment Japan tried to set the more than 100 decarbonization model region by 2030. So what is this decarbonization model region is? So this region aims to achieve net zero CO2 emissions, especially for consumer sector through the promotion of the renewable energy. So I think if we can expand this number in Japan in the future more than 100, I think finally we can, of course, reduce the energy consumption with the promotion of the use of the renewable energy. So now Ministry of the Environment Japan, they call the proposal for from the local government, and I think the first selection will be announced next month. So this is the end of my slide, and so I think the future perspective, as for the future perspective, I think there are 3 important points. And the first point is, I think the local government have to consider so how they can develop the vision that meets the needs and characteristics of the community, because I think that each region have a different culture and also different characteristics. So. And also, I think if we are talking about characteristics of the community, we have to collaborate with different departments like environment and industry and transportation. So, so collaboration with the various stakeholders is necessary for future's preparation. And also. So after 2020, many stakeholders are trying to join the climate change here to contribute to greenhouse gas emission reductions. So, but still, there is a lack of the capacity and expertise. So, through this kind of today's webinar, maybe this could be very helpful for further understanding and also sharing the experiences through the stakeholder. And final point is cooperation with the resident is very much essential. So IGES, our organization, we are trying to promote more. We are also focusing on the more civil society, how to encourage their actions from their lifestyle. So still, I think the very few number of the participants from the citizen level. So how we can encourage and incentivize for citizen level to join the our target is I think the key for in the future. So now I just want to stop my presentation and thank you very much for your kind attention and opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Takahashi. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation. Now, since we have very little time left, only about 4 minutes left, let me take this opportunity to ask you a question, which I think may be of interest to participants. Is that since Japan has declared this net zero CO2 emissions by 2050 and has started implementing various measures, could you give us an example, a concrete example of a city-level initiative in Japan that seems to have been effective in reducing GHGs? And there was a question from one of the participants, is that if possible, could you also give an example if a local government has initiated carbon sequestration or a carbon sink? Thank you, Mr. Takahashi.
Oh, thank you very much for questions. I think the first question is that yeah, now I think the local governments has a many example and many good practice to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And maybe later, after my presentation, the Kyoto city, they can share a good example from the city level. And if I may share the example from the Tokyo area, before they announced the carbon neutral targets, the Tokyo area, they already implement emission cap and trade system at the city level, and they cover the entity level, especially for building sector, who have more than 3,000 tons CO2 per year. And they are now already entering the third phase compliance period, and now 1,200 entity covered by this cap and trade system. So I think if we are talking about regulations, we are very careful to design the future system. But I think so if we are more encouraged to the emission reduction at the city level, maybe those kind of system may be considered in the future to have significant emission reduction in the future. And I think the question for carbon sequestration. So sorry, I just missed your second question.
Yeah, is there any example of a city level initiative which has been effective on carbon sequestration and sinks?
Okay, I think one of the good example is I think Shimokawa town, located in Hokkaido area. They have a huge area of the forestry. And one of their example is they joined the domestic carbon offset project to promote more emission removal in the forestry sector. And when they trade and credit in the past, I think that they can benefit the financial benefit from the private sector when they trade. And I think the benefit can be shared with the community to reinvest the more biomass energies in their area. So I think that was one of the example in the past around 2008 to 2050.
Thank you. And we are very short of time, but we have one interesting question. That is another question from the participants is that, can you give us how does Japan handle at the local government level the mandatory requirements for energy efficiency, particularly for commercial and residential buildings? Because that is basic. We believe that could be a local government responsibility.
I think that it's still it's not mandatory. Just they just encourage and I think try to now prepare for the future arrangement. And so yeah, so that is maybe what I understand the current situation, and I hope that maybe we can share some more experiences in the future once they are ready to implement.
Sorry, there's one more question. Because of your presentation, there are so many interesting questions. Is that what kind of incentives and support do cities get in preparation of the decarbonization plans? So are there any incentives or any help that they are provided?
Yes, so that is very good questions, and yeah, our research organization also trying to how to solve these challenges and issues. And I think one of the challenges is one of the incentive is to maybe provide some so for some ticket or the coupon if they can achieve the some emission reduction from their lifestyle. Maybe if we can share some ticket or coupon to promote more some reduction of the energy, that can be very helpful to encourage their participation. But it's depending on the maybe culture. And in Japan, we have some experiences to provide eco point. So if we can promote more purchasement of the green product, government will provide has been provided in the eco point to promote more good product in the past. So those kind of this maybe ticket or coupon system may helpful, but I think still we need to consider how we design.
Thank you, Mr. Takahashi. Thank you very much on behalf of all the participants for this wonderful presentation and your responses to all the questions. And now you will take over my role and be the moderator in the next session. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Barjor and Takahashi-san, for this presentation. Now we're going to move to the next session that is going to be on the city level. And this is going to be the case of Kyoto. We will learn the journey from the Kyoto Protocol, the COP3 at the very beginning to 2050 carbon neutrality. But before we start this session, a friendly reminder that this session will be in Japanese language. If you are following this event in English, please select this language in the translation function in Zoom. And you can do that by clicking the icon below the screen that goes into the translation session. And now let's move to this session on Kyoto Experience. The moderator of the session will be Takahashi-san, the speaker of the previous one. He gratefully will moderate now in Japanese too. Takahashi-san, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
様ありがとうございます。それでは、私の方で
Thank you so much. Now I would like to moderate this coming session. So this is the introduction of Japanese case. From Kyoto City, we have a speaker. Our speaker now is the Kyoto Global Warming Countermeasure Team, Mr. Hirofumi Yano will speak for us. Let me introduce his brief backdrop. In 1999, he worked for the Kyoto City, and then he's been working on the local city building and small mid-business support and disaster prevention and resilience structure. And Kyoto, very first no carbon lifestyle promotion team. So since 2020 April, he's been working on this. So now I would like to ask Mr. Yano to share with us Kyoto case. Yano-san, please.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. So Kyoto is a city which has hosted the Kyoto COP3 and launched the Kyoto Protocol. So let me share my screen. Thank you. So by the Kyoto Protocol, and Kyoto started to work on the global warming issues, and I'm in charge of such issues in Kyoto city government. So today I would like to talk about the features of the Kyoto city first, and then I just give you some background of the Kyoto, and I would like to talk about the progress and achievements to the climate change and the countermeasures, and I would like to introduce some of the efforts to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 at Kyoto city, and I would like to show you some international collaboration cases. And this is a feature of the Kyoto city. We are at the very end of the east side of Asia. Our population is 1.47 million, and about 80% of the city is in a green space, and then most of the area are the densely it's a very dense residential area. And before the COVID-19, there were about 50 million travelers visited Kyoto, and about 10% of the population is a student. So it's a very heavily academic area. So this is the global warming countermeasures in Kyoto. At Kyoto, and starting from 1997, we hosted the COP3, and then it was the starting year that we engaged in the global warming issues. And here in Kyoto, we set up enacted Japan the first ordinance specifically addressing global warming. And then this effort was recognized by the central government, and then it became an eco-model city. And in 2017, a symposium held to commemorate the 20th anniversary Kyoto Protocol, and also we declared the Kyoto Declaration. So the more specific countermeasures on our Kyoto side. In Kyoto, cities do not just obey the government. But sometimes, even though we don't ask them, the citizens would like to take up a very new, novel stuff. So we are not going to force anything to the citizens, but we just encourage the people to take on some actions. For example, promotion of the innovation is one thing. I mentioned that Kyoto is a city of the university. So they are taking that and leveraging that in the future. Silicon carbide, which is a remarkable energy-saving office, and also cellulose nanofiber, which is a new material derived from plants. And this is one of the examples of the industry, academia, government collaboration, and that is underway. And then also we need to we recognize that in a community-based initiative is very important, and therefore we do this kind of an activity based on a school district, and which is a unit of their local governance. And we know that we need to foster leaders, and so the Children's Eco Life Challenge, and it's an educational program for elementary school students, and it's being conducted at municipal elementary schools. And then also the Kyoto Environmental Management System and energy saving levels for home appliances, which are now widely used throughout Japan. And this was born in Kyoto. And this was being launched by the initiatives of the citizens. So with these efforts, now when we think about what is the role that the city should play, well, the city is a major emitter of the greenhouse gases because there are so much in the population. Therefore, we have a big role as a greenhouse and emission carbon. And also, if we set the goal, and that will set the tone for the citizens to go for the good direction, and then we can disseminate the activities. And therefore, in 2017, which was the 20th year after the Kyoto Protocol. And then we set up the Kyoto Declaration, which shows what we need to do as a global cities. So with this as an initiative that we would like to commit as one of the international cities. So let me talk about the actual reduction in emissions initiatives. With these efforts, starting from versus 2013, we were able to reduce 20.7% of the greenhouse gas emissions. Energy consumption reduced significantly. Kyoto Protocol, that was a peak year, that was 1997, about 30% was reduced. And there is much difference about the population. Well, it's just that the tourists increased from 30 million to 50 million. It was a significant increase. However, because of the efforts of the citizens and the entities, we were able to reduce so much. In 2011, we had the East Japan and a great earthquake, and there was in a year when we had the big incidents of the nuclear reactors, and that was a year when we recognized that and how important and we should be in a very safe conditions.
Towards the 2050 carbon neutral, Paris Agreement with that in May 11th, 2019, net zero CO2 emission by 2050 was announced. And 2020 October, as the Japanese government becomes a policy officially to aim for the zero. And then it is an important role for us to raise our voice to influence the national government. And towards the carbon neutral by 2050, 10 years up until 2030 is very important. Therefore, we have recreated Kyoto City's global warming countermeasures plan. And not aiming for CO2 zero only at 2050. However, we need to materialize the affluent Kyoto city for next generation so that lifestyle, business, energy, mobility for area transition is need to be realized. So appropriate management of forests and farmland, which absorb CO2 and adaptation measures to climate change is being promoted. This is an example, lifestyle change initiatives. In order to promote the shift to a decarbonized lifestyle for each citizen, it's necessary to consider what type of carbonized lifestyle is suitable for Kyoto. Therefore, in September, we launched a new project. 2 meetings have been held so far to discuss the vision of lifestyles in 2050 and the goals to achieve them by 2030. So the goals by 2030 and then other countermeasures has been discussed. By 2030, what kind of a list of actions that we would like citizens to take and the project that will actually encourage them to take those actions are being discussed. We would like to create a mechanism that will lead to the decarbonization of what we want to do rather than relying on good intentions and consequence of each individual. Next is a case for a business transformation. Until now, there are only mandates for large-scale businesses, but we have created a new system that requires medium-sized businesses to report their annual energy consumption. By reporting, businesses are first made aware of their own energy consumption, and also Kyoto City compiles the reported data and provides comparative feedback to each company, such as your company uses more energy than other similar companies, which will lead to energy conservation efforts. And this full-fledged effort will start from this coming April. Now, energy conversion example. To ensure the demand for renewable energy in Kyoto is met, we concluded the partnership agreement with Aizu Wakamatsu City in Fukushima Prefecture, which is rich in renewable energy resources, and created a system that enables Kyoto to use renewable energy produced in Aizu Wakamatsu. In addition, Kyoto has a system in place to encourage citizens to switch to electricity derived from renewable energy sourced by purchasing renewable energy electricity jointly at a lower cost. This is the very first initiative in Japan. Now, example of adaptation to climate change. In July last year, Kyoto City established the Climate Change Adaptation Center to collect and analyze information on the effects of climate change in cooperation with the Research Institute. IPCC LOX assessment report was written by Mr. Tetsuo Yasunari as well, and then he was appointed as the center director. This will not only collect and analyze information, but also coordinate the creation of adaptation businesses, including the development of products and services that will benefit the businesses. Now, I would like to share with you some examples of information gathering at the Adaptation Center. First, we conducted interviews with various entities to understanding the impact of the climate change in Kyoto. We're trying to gather information on the impact on natural ecosystems, agriculture, and forestry, and tourism due to the change in the season, and then vegetables impacted by environment. And we are also trying to clarify the relationship among various fields, such as how much of an impact will spread to the Japanese food culture. In this process, the effect on agriculture products and gardens have been clarified, and we conducted some interviews with the traditional cultural leaders of Kyoto. So for one thing is that Kyoto is the 1200-year history as an all-time capital of Japan, and there is the distribution impact. Kyoto has been the capital of Japan for a long time, and as a result, good products were gathered from all over Japan. For example, sake is made from rice. It's and also flowers used in the traditional Japanese culture of ikebana. So not only the flowers produced in Kyoto, but also from all over Japan, the good quality ones come to Kyoto, so that the effect of climate change in one area of Japan can be mitigated. And then next is the change in people's awareness and view of nature. Originally, Japanese people had a sense of awe and friendliness towards nature, but the climate change effects has become serious, and natural disasters have increased. And then there is a concern that this awareness may be changing a sense of into the sense of threat. So the effect of climate change may have an impact not only on the physical but also people's mentality. And we would like to make use of this information to promote effective adaptation measures. International cooperation, which Kyoto City considers to be very important. Carbon neutrality cannot be achieved by Kyoto only. Entire planet needs to work together. Each one of the city deepens its efforts and need to collaborate with other cities in Japan and abroad, so that entire world can evolve the efforts. For this reason, Kyoto City is a member of International Local Government Partnership and then such as E-Cray and the world's premier's pledge. And then we are exchanging information with local governments and around the world. And last March, Kyoto became the first Japanese municipality to join the Coal-Free League. In Japan, fossil fuels, including coal, are widely used, and it's not easy to gain understanding. But we would like to contribute to the shift from fossil fuels to renewable energies. I hope that all of you who are here today will share the importance of cooperation among local governments and consider joining one of these organizations. This is a summary. Kyoto City has been working on the Kyoto Protocol as its birthplace. First of all, we have been promoting initiatives by making each one of the citizens to be aware of the protocol, expanding interest in the protocol, and supporting the initiative of citizens and businesses. To become carbon neutral by 2050, it is necessary for everyone, not just a few, to act voluntarily and proactively. So it's necessary. We will never get there by appealing to the goodwill and conscience of citizens and forcing them to be patient. It's necessary to change society to one in which the provision and choice of decarbonized products and services is in the norm, and to shift people's awareness and assumptions. For that, we need to have transition in each area. It's necessary to take every possible approach to promote the transition. And 2050 is a future that no city has yet reached. We must continue to go through a process of trial and error to get there. Kyoto City plan calls for positive action, and we would like to proceed with all the measures possible, and including some new approach as well. That's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting with concrete examples. As Yano-san explained, in 2004, Kyoto enacted the ordinance, and I believe that triggered other cities to follow. And I myself, so it is my honor to hear the Kyoto cities, their initiatives, because my first job in this field was the Kyoto Protocol. Now, I have about 7 minutes for Q&A session, so I would like to pick up some of the questions that I have received. I myself participated in a COP26. And as you have mentioned, young people, and those young people are highlighted for the activities in this field. And the change of the lifestyle, and thus we are going to change in energy consumption, and also the change of their purchasing behavior. I think this is something we need to work on. So how are you going to give training or education to the young people from this past perspective? If we have any concrete idea or initiative that you are doing at Kyoto City, we'll be very happy to hear. Yes, net zero in 2050, that means that we have to think about who is going to be the center of the society, and that is the children at this moment. And then we have to foster them as a leader. As I mentioned earlier, Children Eco Life Challenge, and that is one of the initiatives that I talked about. At all the elementary school, we provide this kind of lessons at the elementary school. when they have a holidays, during summer holidays and winter holidays, the children would implement their own initiatives. But actually, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were not able to do this in the class. Therefore, we have to do this on a video base. But we can enhance the awareness of the children. But not only the children, we can enhance the awareness of their parents. They can change the behavior of their mothers and fathers. So, from that perspective, we know that the leaders in the future will be the children, but we can at the same time change the behavior of their parents. So we think that this is a good initiative, and also decarbonization lifestyle. And when we are going to promote this shift, we have to focus on the young generation. We have the organization called Friday Kyoto, and a lot of the young generation are participating in these activities, and we are asking them to give us some feedback, and this is how we would like to pursue our activities. Thank you very much. And I think this is a great and impactful activity from children to parents. And not only the children maybe teach their grandparents. So some of the questions from the audience. In Kyoto City and Aizu Wakayama, and you mentioned about the sharing of the energies. Could you repeat the question? We couldn't hear. What kind of a renewable energy do Aizu Wakayama's generating? Well, actually, I don't know precisely what it is, but the solar energy and then water, the sea waters. And because in Kyoto, we don't have much flat land, and then therefore it is not easy for us to develop a lot of the solar energy field. But in Aizu Wakamatsu, they have plenty of land, and for them it's easier for them to generate renewable energy. And I think this is why we started this. Thank you. Okay, let me see what else do we have. Yes, we know our time is limited, so in the interest of the time, I would like to share my thoughts for my summary. And thank you very much for your explanation of Fridays for Future. You mentioned that you are cooperating with them. I think this is a very important initiative. And environmental, social activities, this is something not highlighted well in Japan, but if we try to pursue this, I think this kind of an activity will be disseminated further. And then also the exchange of the opinion of the young generation, we see more and more active interchange of the comments on the thoughts going on globally. So if you And I think this is a great opportunity for us to exchange our opinions with the consumers and the citizens. And thank you very much for your presentation for today. Now, with this, I would like to close my session. So, Mura-san.
Thank you very much, Takahashi-san and Yano-san, for the presentation and for the dialogue and the response of the many questions that we have for the session, which shows the
高橋さん、矢野さん、それからたくさん質問いただきました。皆様ありがとうございました。
This is the end of the public webinar for our external audience. So thank you very much for joining us today in this public event session. For country delegations, we will take a 10 minutes coffee break. However, please make sure to re-enter the program from the Zoom meeting link, which we have sent to you. So we will not longer use the Zoom webinar link. This was only for the public event. We will now use the Zoom link we used yesterday and we will continue using for the remaining days. Just in case, we have emailed to you the Zoom meetings link again, so you can find it in the in your email. Thank you very much, and see you soon to the TDD participants. And thank you very much for joining to the public event participants. Bye-bye.